You arrive in a new city, exhausted from a long trip. You just need a place to rest for the night. Somewhere cheap, nothing fancy. The receptionist barely looks up as you hand over your ID. You take your key, climb the stairs, and lock the door behind you. Finally, peace. But what if this was the last room you would ever enter? What if, by morning, you were gone, vanished without a trace? Because in some places, checking in is easy, but checking out? That's another story. A 32-year-old man named Luis checked into a small, cheap hotel in Lagos de Moreno, Mexico. He was traveling for work and needed a place to stay for the night. He paid for a single room, left his ID at the front desk, and walked upstairs to his room. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. A week later, his family reported him missing after he failed to return home. When the police went to the hotel to ask about him, the staff acted strangely. The front desk clerk claimed he had checked out, but couldn't provide any security footage. The officers searched his room and found his suitcase still there, but no other signs of him. Suspicious, the authorities dug deeper into the hotel's history and found something chilling. Over the past 5 years, more than 20 guests had checked in, but were never recorded leaving. They were never reported missing because many were travelers, migrants, or people with little family contact. Police began a full-scale raid of the hotel. In the basement, they made a gruesome discovery. Several rusty metal barrels filled with human remains, some burned beyond recognition. The smell of rotting flesh was overwhelming. In another room, investigators found a makeshift torture chamber, complete with blood-stained floors and chains bolted to the walls. Authorities later determined that the hotel was a front for a cartel disappearance site, where victims were taken, tortured, and disposed of. The cartel had been kidnapping unsuspecting guests, sometimes for ransom, sometimes for recruitment, and sometimes just to make them vanish. Luis' remains were never found, but his family believes he was one of the victims. The hotel was shut down, and several employees were arrested, but the masterminds behind the operation, they were never caught. To this day, travelers warn each other to be extremely careful when booking cheap, unverified hotels in cartel-controlled areas, because you might check in, but never check out. It was a humid night in August 2022 when Samantha, a 26-year-old woman from Texas, experienced something she still can't explain. She had just moved into a rural house on the outskirts of town. It was a peaceful area with miles of empty land, a few scattered trees, and no nearby neighbors. She was used to the quiet. Until that night. At around 12:30 a.m., she was watching TV when she heard a soft knock on her front door. It was so faint that at first she thought she imagined it. Then, the knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Confused, she hesitated. Who would be knocking at this hour? Her nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She walked to the peephole and froze. A young boy, no older than 8, stood alone on her porch, staring straight at the door. He was wearing old, tattered clothes, and his skin looked unnaturally pale, almost sickly. Then, he spoke, but something about his voice sent shivers down her spine. "Let me in, I'm lost." It was a monotone, emotionless voice. It didn't sound like a child's voice at all. It sounded wrong. Samantha's instincts screamed at her not to open the door. Instead, she called out, "Where are your parents?" The boy didn't answer. He just repeated, "Let me in. I need to use your phone." A sinking feeling gripped her chest. Something wasn't right. She tried to get a better look at his face, but the porch light barely illuminated him. Then, he lifted his head fully, and that's when she saw them. His eyes. They weren't normal. They weren't human. They were completely black, like deep pools of ink. A wave of pure dread crashed over her. Every survival instinct screamed at her to lock the door and back away, but she couldn't move. The boy stood still, his lips slightly curled into what almost looked like a smile. He took one step forward and pressed his palm against the door. "Let me in." Samantha slammed the deadbolt shut, ran to her bedroom, and called 911. But as soon as she picked up the phone, the knocking stopped. When the police arrived, 15 minutes later, the boy was gone. They searched the area, but there were no footprints on the dusty porch. The officers dismissed it as a prank, but Samantha knew better. She had heard the stories before about black-eyed children, beings that appeared at people's doors, begging to be let inside. Some say they're ghosts, others claim they're something far worse. She moved out of that house 2 months later, but she still has nightmares about that night, because deep down, she knows if she had opened the door, she wouldn't be here to tell the story. Actually, there had been over 300 recorded reportings of the black-eyed children as far back as the 1940s, and mostly in rural or suburban development areas right along the outskirts of major cities. In 2021, Mike Hansen, a 33-year-old mechanic in South Carolina, started noticing weird things happening in his home. At first, it was small. He'd come home and find that his food was missing, or his back door was slightly open, even though he was sure he locked it. Then, at night, he started hearing faint scratching noises coming from inside his walls. Thinking it was a rat or a raccoon, he set up a motion-activated camera in his kitchen. He expected to catch a rodent, but what he captured was so much worse. That night, he reviewed the footage, and his blood ran cold. At around 2:45 a.m., his camera picked up movement. The pantry door slowly creaked open, and a woman's head peeked out, a real, living woman. She crawled out, moving silently, and stood there in the darkness for a few moments, staring at his bedroom door. Then, she walked to the fridge, took some food, and disappeared back into the pantry. Mike grabbed a baseball bat and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house and found a tiny, hidden door leading to a crawl space beneath the floorboards. Inside, they found a makeshift bed, food wrappers, and a notebook. When they flipped through the pages, they saw detailed notes about Mike's daily routine, what time he left for work, when he went to bed, even what he liked to eat. The woman, identified as a homeless drifter, had been living under his house for weeks, watching him, learning his habits, waiting for the right moment. The police arrested her, but Mike never felt safe in that house again. He moved out within a month, unable to shake the feeling that someone was still watching him.